If there were a divorce, if there were a separation, naturally both parents, wherever they were living, would.
Lady Colin Campbell and Tom Bower didn't just stir the pot, they set the entire royal narrative on fire. Because what they dropped wasn't a rumor, it was a direct hit at the most guarded, most emotionally untouchable part of Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's story. And the moment that allegation hit the air, everything changed. This wasn't whispers in the dark. This wasn't anonymous gossip drifting through tabloids. This was loud, specific, and coming from two figures who had built reputations on saying what others wouldn't dare to touch. And that's what made it dangerous, because when voices like theirs align, people don't just listen, they lean in. The claim? A surrogacy secret, hidden, protected, buried beneath years of carefully controlled storytelling. And suddenly, the question wasn't just, is it true? It became, why is this being said now? And why does it feel like it won't go away? Within hours, the internet exploded. Timelines flooded. Commentators scrambled. Even the most cautious media outlets, those that usually tiptoe around royal controversy, couldn't look away. Because this wasn't just scandal, this was a crack forming in a narrative that had been tightly sealed for years. And here's the part that made it spiral out of control. This didn't need proof to cause damage. The question itself was enough. The doubt itself was enough. The seed had been planted and it was growing fast. But then came the move that no one saw coming. And maybe, just maybe, the move that made everything worse. Instead of staying silent, instead of letting the storm burn itself out, Meghan and Harry struck back hard. Legal notices flew out. Warnings were issued. The message was clear: stop talking or face consequences. On paper, it looked powerful, strategic, familiar. They had done this before and won. They knew how to fight the press. They knew how to shut things down. But this time, something didn't go according to plan. Because the moment they stepped into the legal arena, they weren't controlling the narrative anymore. The rules changed. And in the UK legal system, those rules don't protect silence, they demand answers. Suddenly, the burden shifted. If you say something is false, you don't just deny it, you prove it. And that's where everything began to unravel. Because Lady Colin Campbell and Tom Bower didn't retreat. They didn't apologize. They didn't backtrack. They pushed forward. Their legal teams responded with something far more dangerous than accusations. They demanded evidence. Real, documented, verifiable evidence. Medical records. Timelines. Proof. The very things that had always been kept behind closed doors were now being pulled into the light. And just like that, the strategy flipped. What was supposed to silence the story gave it a courtroom. What was meant to shut people up forced the conversation into a place where silence wasn't allowed. Because a courtroom doesn't deal in narratives, it deals in facts, documents, proof. And for the first time, the story wasn't being debated in headlines or social media threads. It was being processed inside a system that doesn't bend to reputation, status, or carefully crafted public images. Then came the moment that changed the entire atmosphere. The court stepped in, and everything tightened. No more speculation, no more vague statements. The court laid it out clearly: what was needed, when it was needed, and what would happen if it wasn't delivered. No extensions, no soft landings, no carefully worded PR responses, just a deadline and a demand: produce the evidence. Because if the allegations were false, the proof should exist. Simple, clean, undeniable. But that word started to echo louder with every passing moment. If. Because behind the scenes, something strange was happening. When investigators began digging, really digging, they expected to find a trail. That's how the system works. Hospitals log everything. Appointments, records, procedures, it's all documented, especially for people as high profile as Meghan and Harry. Their lives had been photographed, tracked, analyzed down to the smallest detail. So finding medical confirmation, that should have been easy, routine, obvious, but it wasn't. The trail went quiet. Records that should have existed didn't surface. Documentation that should have been standard wasn't there. Channels that normally confirm everything returned nothing. And that's where the tension shifted into something deeper. Because this wasn't proof of anything. Not yet, but it was something else. Absence. Gaps. Silence where there should have been clarity. And in a legal battle, silence doesn't protect you. It raises questions. More questions. And those questions started stacking up fast. Investigators didn't jump to conclusions. They couldn't. That's not how this works. But they noted everything. Every missing record. Every unexplained gap. And as they kept digging, the silence didn't break. It deepened. At the same time, timelines were being mapped. Public appearances, travel records, dates, movements. And slowly, inconsistencies began to surface. Not loud, not explosive, but persistent. persistent, things that didn't quite align, moments that didn't quite fit, details that on their own could be explained away, but together they started forming a pattern. And patterns are dangerous because once people see them, they can't unsee them. Witness accounts added another layer: quiet voices, observations, recollections that didn't fully match the public version of events. Some were vague, some more direct, not all verified. But again, it wasn't about one piece, it was about accumulation. And by now, the story had transformed. This wasn't gossip anymore, this was a puzzle, and every missing piece was becoming louder than the ones already on the table. Meanwhile, the court wasn't slowing down. If anything, it was tightening its grip, because what it was about to demand next would leave no room for interpretation, no room for silence, no room for control. And for Meghan and Harry, the space to maneuver was shrinking fast. What came next wasn't just pressure, it was a full-blown legal chokehold closing in from every direction. And for Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, the options were no longer strategic, they were survival-based. Because the court didn't just ask for answers, it structured a demand so precise, so complete, that there was almost no way to partially escape it. This wasn't a fishing expedition, it was targeted, clinical, ruthless in its clarity. 3 pillars, that's what the court built its demand on. Full medical records, original, unedited, time-stamped, not summaries, not statements. The raw documentation that every legitimate pregnancy automatically generates. Appointment logs, clinical notes, delivery records, a paper trail that in any normal circumstance would be impossible to erase. Then came DNA verification, the kind of evidence that doesn't argue, doesn't interpret, doesn't bend, it confirms, it ends debates, it closes doors permanently. And finally, a complete cross-checkable timeline, one that could be laid side by side with every public appearance, every travel record, every photographed moment the world had already seen. It was a framework designed with one brutal truth: you either meet it completely or you fail completely. There was no middle ground. And just like that, the legal move that was meant to protect them turned into a trap they had built with their own hands. Because walking away now, that would look like surrender. Staying in without the evidence, that would look worse. Inside the legal team, the cracks began to show. Not publicly, not yet. But behind closed doors, the calm precision lawyers are known for started to fracture under something far more chaotic: uncertainty. One side argued, comply. Give the court everything, whatever it takes, because legally that's the only path that leads out alive. Another side pushed back hard, full compliance might not even be possible. The documents, the structure, the expectations, it wasn't lining up cleanly. And if you can't fully comply, then you stall. Challenge the scope, buy time, shift the battlefield. And then there was the third option, the one nobody wanted to say out loud: retreat, drop the case, walk away. Take the reputational hit, but avoid the legal consequences that could spiral even further out of control. But even that wasn't clean, because in a case like this, retreat doesn't look neutral. It looks like something else, something people notice, something people remember. While those arguments clashed internally, something even more dangerous was happening externally: silence from the one place that could have changed everything. The palace. For a brief moment, there had been quiet hope, unspoken but real, that the institution might step in, that somewhere behind those guarded walls, influence might be used, pressure applied, a quiet intervention to make the entire situation disappear before it exploded any further. Because historically, that's what the system did. It protected, it contained, it managed. But this time, nothing. No statement, no support, no behind-the-scenes rescue. And in royal language, silence doesn't mean uncertainty. It means decision. The message was clear. This battle belonged to Prince Harry and Meghan Markle alone. No financial backing, no institutional shield, no quiet lifeline extended in the background. The distance that had been growing between them and the monarchy, it had just become absolute. And with that door firmly closed, the pressure inside their legal team didn't just increase, it became suffocating. Then came the moment that sent everything into overdrive. The 72-hour deadline. Not a suggestion, not a flexible timeline. A countdown. And from the second it was confirmed, everything shifted into something insiders described as controlled chaos. Because on the surface, everything had to look composed, calculated, professional. But underneath, panic was setting in. The list of required documents was massive. The time to gather them, brutally short. And the gaps, the ones already identified, they weren't closing. They were expanding. Requests were sent out. Urgent, repeated, pressing for confirmations, for records, for anything that could could fill the holes that were now impossible to ignore, but the responses weren't coming in the way they needed. Some were delayed, some incomplete, some non-existent. Inside the team, disagreements turned sharper. Voices that had once debated strategy now clashed over damage control. Decisions that normally took days were being made in hours, and not always cleanly. Critical mistakes began to creep in. Document requests mishandled. Communication breakdowns, submissions prepared under pressure instead of precision, and all of it under a clock that refused to slow down. Outside, the world was watching, not casually, not from a distance, closely. Every development was being dissected in real time. Legal analysts breaking down each move, commentators amplifying every delay, social media turning speculation into momentum at a speed no legal team could contain. And one phrase started appearing everywhere: show the truth. It wasn't a question anymore, it was a demand. And as the deadline crept closer, the pressure reached a level where even silence became loud. Because for the first time in all their public battles, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry weren't shaping the narrative. They weren't speaking, they weren't reframing, they were absent. And that absence spoke volumes. Then came the final hours, the last stretch before everything would be decided. Inside the legal team, one final push. Partial evidence was assembled, quickly, urgently, and perfectly. Packages of documentation compiled under intense pressure, reflecting a reality no one wanted to admit openly. A complete submission wasn't possible, so they sent what they had, framed it as good faith, argued that it was enough, that the gaps were due to privacy concerns, not absence. But the court didn't bend, it didn't interpret, it didn't negotiate, because partial compliance isn't compliance. And the response came back fast, clear, unforgiving. Incomplete submissions rejected, improper formats dismissed, deadlines unchanged. And just like that, every remaining exit started closing, one by one, until there were none left. Outside, the reaction exploded. This wasn't just a legal story anymore, it had become something bigger, a cultural moment, a global fixation. People who had never followed royal news were now watching every update, every decision, every silence. And the narrative forming in real time? It wasn't kind, it wasn't sympathetic. It was shifting into something far more damaging, because what people were seeing wasn't control, it was collapse. A legal strategy that had run out of road, a team scrambling to hold something together that was already slipping apart. And at the center of it all, two figures who had once mastered the art of controlling their story, now unable to say anything at all. Then the deadline hit. No dramatic last-minute filing, no sudden reveal, no evidence that changed the outcome, just silence. And in that silence, the court moved forward exactly as it had warned it would. The ruling came down with quiet finality, not explosive, not theatrical, but absolute. Failure to comply, and with it, consequences that couldn't be undone. Financial penalties hit immediately, heavy, undeniable, and landing at a time when stability already wasn't guaranteed. But money wasn't the real damage. Reputation was, because the allegations that Lady Colin Campbell and Tom Bower had thrown into the world hadn't been buried. They hadn't been dismissed. They had gone through the legal system and come out the other side stronger, not proven, but not disproven. And in the public mind, that distinction matters less than you'd think. Because in the end, the simplest truth echoed louder than everything else. They went to court to prove it wasn't real, and they couldn't. And once that echo starts, it doesn't fade.